Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
The information contained within this podcast does not consider your personal circumstances and is of a general nature only. You should not act on it without first obtaining professional financial advice specific to your circumstances.
Paul Atherton is an ex-Wall Street advisor on a mission to help young people win back their financial power, wealth and security. He does this by helping them understand the hidden world of finance, risk and investments, helps them figure out how it impacts them, and to seize the opportunities to make it work to their advantage. This is Paul Street Journal.
I'm with Paul Atherton here this morning. How are you, Paul?
Hey, Tim. Yeah, I'm doing really well.
That's good to hear. I was just thinking, I told you earlier, I've been thinking about buying a house, but I've been told I have bad credit. I'm just wondering what I can do to improve it.
Tim, well, I'm very surprised you have bad credit. I don't believe it for a second. But let's say, for argument's sake, that you did. And look, this is life, and it does happen to people, and it's happened to clients of mine. You've inquired for a credit card or a personal loan or a mortgage, and they've rejected you based on your credit score. The first thing I would suggest you do is go and find out what that credit score is. Go get your credit history. By legislation, by law, you have a right to a free credit report every year, once a year. And even if you pay for it, it doesn't cost that much. So look it up. Equifax, it used to be called Vader in Australia. Get your credit score. It'll have your credit history and everything on it. Every lender or proposed lender or everything on somebody that's lent you money in the past will have something thrown onto that piece of paper, and it takes for interesting, if sometimes painful, reading. So do that. Now you looked at that, and you'll see where the problems are. And now one of the major drivers I think we've gone through before is your payment history. So you really need to improve your payment history. And to do that, you just got to go through and pay all your due bills one at a time, search them out, and make sure that everyone is paid. And what the credit score will do is look at how long it takes you to pay your bills and what is due. So make sure you can clean that up. That's a really first port of call. Pay down your debts, consolidate your debts, if at all possible. Get rid of, the low-hanging fruit. There'll be a credit card out there that maybe has only got a couple of $100s. Pay that off. Get rid of it. You have a store card that you've bought a pair of shoes on. Pay that off. Get rid of it. So really go through this sort of very methodical approach of lowering the number of outstanding credit payments that you make every month. So that's just, it's good housekeeping, but it will certainly help your credit score. Potentially counterintuitive might be what I usually tell people is actually go in and lower your credit limits. Now, people usually look at me in pain to do this because they live off this, but once you've reduced your outgoings, you've got a little bit better control over your finances, you've cleared off your debt, you're paying down your credit cards, it's really time to look at your credit limits and lowering them. Why? Because if you're buying a house, when the lender does a sum for your expenses versus what you can afford, so essentially that's how we pay a house, right? A lender will look at your income and the cost of the mortgage for your outgoing. They'll add other aspects to that, and one of those other aspects of your income versus outgoing, one of those outgoing expenses is your credit limit. Now, let's say you walked in and you have a $10,000 limit on your card, but you've been very good and you have nothing outstanding. Does the bank care? No. They calculate your expense based on the limit, on that $10,000 limit. And the rule of thumb is about 3% per month. So a $10,000 limit will mean about $300 added to your expenses per month. And that will adversely impact what you can borrow. Whereas somebody has a $500 limit, so in theory has a lot less credit, capacity than yourself, or a person with $10,000, But their expenses, if calculated off that, would only be $15. So there you go. So if you have a $10,000, lower it to $500. Now, the other thing to think about doing, let's say we've had a bit of a troubled history with our credit, we've got our life together, but there's some stuff on there, and I'm not very happy being on there. Well, sometimes this is a point where you go to a credit repair agency. And why would you do this? Well, I can tell you, a good credit repair agency are unbelievably good. Now, these guys are experts. The good guys, the good ones. There are ways to determine that, and potentially, Tim, we can talk about how to identify a good credit repair agency. But let's assume you find a good credit repair agency. These guys, man, they really know how to get the adverse events off your credit history. Why? Because credit lenders and banks, and they just throw everything up against your up into your credit file. Everything goes there. And do they follow the rules and the regulations? Do they follow the due process? No, they don't. Right? They look, the people are busy, back offices are busy. They don't know the law is incredibly complex. The legislation is very tricky. It's consumer biased. That means it's biased towards your safety and your worth, not the banks and the lenders. And I know guys that do this for a living, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel for these guys. And you can have a credit history cleaned up in very short order. So, but be very careful with this too, because it's not cheap. Okay? If you have something that's on an adverse event on your credit score, but guess what? It may just be falling off. If it's a month away from falling off, because it doesn't stay on there forever. Not everything stays on your credit file forever. There are time limits for certain types of credit events. You may just want to wait. So that's something you may want to discuss. And by the way, you can discuss that with the credit repair agency. They're pretty good. A good agency, the first meeting with them, they can discuss it. They'll tell you, hey, look, you're a month away from that. You don't need us. But these things you definitely need us for. So just search out somebody good if you really are in that type of position. But the first port of call is get that credit score, of course.
Easy. Well, thank you for coming in.
That's great, Tim. Thank you.
Paul Street Journal.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.